YouTube, this is your boy Alex. I'm back. I'm washing my work clothes at my house, and then I'm gonna actually go to the actually laundromat and actually wash clothes because the washer machine that I have in my house it only washes limited clothes, so I can only wash like two or three pairs of shirts or pants, and then that's all the machine will wash. And then the big giant load got to be someplace else. I don't go to work until like 4 hours later, 4 or 5 hours later. I do the late afternoon shift. That's like 4 hours. But that's not why you're watching my YouTube video now, is it? Now, I did say I was going to come back with a part two to the highly anticipated video, Sex Game, Television and Film versus Horror, part two. And I left off yesterday that all of my favorite horror movies that came in the late 1970s, the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s, now we pick up in chapter 2 of this documentary series that at this point horror had became like a joke. Like it became a laughing stock. It was like what used to scare the shit out of you just became a part of entertainment. You know, all of a sudden you looked at Saturday Night Live, Mad TV was making fun of some of your favorite horror movies from that time period. You know, they were taking things that scared the shit out of them and were making fun of it. Like they were making fun of Jason. Like they would make fun of Jason Voorhees and how ugly he was and how he could not physically, sexually attract women to save his life. They were making fun of Michael Myers. Freddy Krueger they couldn't make fun of because in some of the Freddy Krueger movies, Freddy was making fun of himself, so they couldn't make fun of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. But characters like Jason and Michael Myers that don't talk, they would make fun of. Chucky they would make fun of because he's short, which is a bad representation if you're a man that's short, because that's saying if you're too short, then you can't get no girls. So they would make fun of Chucky. If you look at Bride of Chucky and Seed of Chucky, what do you think those became? They became horror comedies because they're taking stuff that scared the shit out of you in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, and they would make fun of it. And the movie genre that kicked off that it was okay to make fun of your favorite horror movies was a thing called Scary Movie. Like Scary Movie came like in those 2000s. Like there was a serious point in the 2000s where it started with Final Destination. Now, those who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about when I say Final Destination. Like the first movie where the plane goes take off in the sky and the shit explode, that's where I think they were taking horror and the psychological era to the next level. And then of course there was Blair Witch Project. It made like at least 4 movies of Blair Witch. Like the first one was the scariest one. Part 2 wasn't as scary as the first one, and part 3 people said it was fake, and part 4 was kind of like the first one. Until you find out it was a filmmaker who did that. So they were trying to advertise something new in the world of horror. And then they just strayed away from it. Like Blair Witch and Final Destination was taking it to a new direction. And then from out of nowhere, they just gave up. Like from out of nowhere, they just said, fuck it, let's make it into horror comedy. All of a sudden, they were taking all your beloved favorite horror characters from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, into those 2000s, and they were just making fun of them. They would actually literally make fun of Jason Voorhees. See, when they made Jason versus Freddy, it had a seriousness to it. And then they started throwing in a bunch of comedy. They brought Chucky back, started making Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, and just started making fun of the characters. And then Michael Myers, was the only one that was serious, but then all of a sudden you didn't get too many of those movies. They tried to revamp them with reboots, but this video is not about remakes or reboots. This is about what happened with the movies. Somewhere, I would say around 2005, somewhere around between 2003 and 2005, horror would get its powerful resurgence when people would go see Scary Movie, Scary Movie 2, Scary Movie 3, which would just make fun of all the horror movies. And it came with Saw. Now, Saw was like a new horror psychological thriller. It was like a psychological torture thriller because it introduced something new in the world of horror that hadn't been seen before. Where you got a doctor who want to know why people don't take life serious and just became this guy that just wanted to get back at people and would play games with the police and the FBI. For those that ain't never seen the first movie of Saw, And then basically it started with that one movie Saw. You know, there's that toy doll that would come to life and say something. You would hear him say, "The game's not over," and you'd be like, "Oh shit!" Like they finally gave you something that would make you think twice about fucking somebody over at work or at school. And then here came Saw 2. Then came Saw 3. Now, to me, they could have stopped at 3 because they could have took a break. Okay, don't make a Saw movie for at least 5 or 6 years. All right, come back with a Saw 4, 5, and 6. At least it would have been 6 years in between the 6 movies. Nope. After they made Saw 3, they came with a Saw 4, then a Saw 5. Then when they should have stopped, they should have stopped at Saw 5 because after they killed the villain in Saw 3, it was like there's no point in watching it no more. Then they made Saw 4 where it was about before he became Saw. That's what Saw 4 was about. Saw 5 was about someone else trying to continue his legacy. So that's what Saw 5 and 6 was about. Saw 7 was about him teaching someone else the stuff before the events of the first 4 films. So they made up to like 7 films of Saw. It was like it was complete overkill. Like it took the genre to a new place it hadn't gone before in horror, and why horror was getting that powerful resurgence. It went from having a powerful resurgence in 2003, and then it had its failure in 2010 because they just overkilled the concept of Saw. Same thing with Hostile. I loved the first film of Hostile. Problem was, the first film had a good concept. They took the idea of a young, attractive man who is so desperate for sex and validation with women that he would go to a foreign country to get it because he couldn't get it right here in America. And they played around with that concept. They made it where, what if you went to the wrong country and your dumbass still made the same mistake, but this time your mistake gets you killed? That was the whole point of the message of the movie Hostile. Be careful when you go to another country because you think it's better. That was the message of that first film. Hostile Part 2 kind of failed to make the mark. And I'm not saying Quentin Terrace, it was his fault. It's just that some people just didn't expect him to go into that direction as a filmmaker. They were used to movies like Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. They expected movies like that from him. They didn't expect this. Like the first Hostile was scary as shit. Because you can imagine 4 desperate men trying to get laid, put themselves in this situation. Hostile Part 2 was kind of like a copycat of the first film because it's girls going on a road trip doing the same thing, and towards the end of the second movie, one of the girls make a deal with the man that she would just go find some people for them to go torture the shit out of. And when it got to Hostile Part 3, here's where the Hostile franchise succeeded, where I think the Saw franchise failed. Hostile, they gave you 3 movies. They gave you 3 movies, 3 stories, and they stopped. Because they knew if they made a part 4, a 5, and a 6, you're just going to kill the concept. And no one's going to want to watch a part 4, a 5, a 6, and a 7 if you keep killing the concept. Saw just kept going. You know, they said, let's make Saw 4. And people's kind of like, I could see a Saw 4, but can it be 5 years later? They made Saw 4 when they didn't even explain what happened at the end of part 3. So when they get to 4, you see he's dead, but then they indicate there's someone that he taught before all that went down. Then here comes Saw 5. Whether you wanted it or not, here came Saw 5. Here comes Saw 6. Then from out of nowhere, here comes Saw 7. And you're scratching your head like, man, that's like 7 movies. Like, when y'all gonna stop? And then when you hear them talking about they're gonna make a Saw 8, it's like, no. Y'all don't need to make no more Saw movies. You made up the 7. 7's enough. I mean, seriously, because you killed the concept. And it's not until we get to 2013 that someone has to come in and bring horror back to its true roots. And what movie do we get that bring it back to its true roots? Get Out. Get Out became that movie to give horror another resurgence. Because they had to go back to the basics, go back to the beginning, go back to the drawing board, and give us something completely new. and that was Get Out. But before we got Get Out, what movie kicked off the resurgence? The Purge movies, right? So we get a Purge movie, we get Purge 2, we get Purge 3, and then we get Get Out. And then we get a movie called Split, which kind of took us to a new direction. A guy with 23 personalities, you don't know what the hell he's going to do when he does it. That's where we got our real surgeons of horror. It's like once we got Split, it's like that's the furthest we can go. Get Out kind of brought us back to the old school horror with a new twist. Split took us to the next level, and then you brought back the Purge movies. First Purge movie was it was complex because the way they were going in different directions. The second one better than the first one, and I don't know what happened with Purge 3. It seemed like Purge 3 just became its own thing, and that's why the first film and the third film people didn't like too much. They came with a Purge 4 because they figured you might have Purge 4. And 4 was just talking about how the Purge first started. Purge 5 was supposed to be like, okay, two bank robbers are going to try to break and do a heist, and only to find out they're in the middle of a purge. So they're giving you 5 Purge movies and a television series. So this is like the reason why I'm going to put from 2001 to like 2014 on here is because that's where it got its resurgence. So we put 2014 down. I might put, to be on the safe side, I might put down 2015 on there to be on the safe side. Either 2014 or 2015. Some people might say put down 2016. So I might put from 2001 to 2016 and name the movies that kind of gave horror its resurgence. You know, and then people are going to ask, what about all these remakes? What do I think about remakes? Well, part 3 will probably just be talking about what happens when you make too many remakes of the same franchise. That's when I'm going to start mentioning Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and Halloween remakes, and how come a lot of the remakes are nowhere near as good as the classics? How come they're not as good as the originals? This one, I wanted to make this like a short, sweet video, not too long. Yesterday's video was 22 minutes. That might have been too long of a video. This is for people who love horror movies. So if you're not a fan of horror movies, you shouldn't be watching this video, because some people might get offended when I name the stuff and the way they do these movies. So until then, peace.